And she just basically says, here's what I'm doing, just follow my cues. Yes, ma'am. And then she went and she pulled a little rope. There's a little steeple and a little church bell, and she rang it, and I noticed the doors started opening up. And the people of Ayurveda came out onto the dirt street. It was one of those beautiful images. You know, an old couple here, a young family there, a rancher here, and they meet on the street, and they gather from the lowest part of the road, and then they walk together to church. It was beautiful. But then I noticed the shepherds' dogs came with them. All the dogs in the village. I mean, there's no fences in this town. There's no leash laws in that part of Wyoming. Goodness sakes, why would you? And the dogs came. I thought, well, you know, when they get to this churchyard, the dogs will stay out in the churchyard, and the people come, you know. They walked up the steps, and the dogs kept coming up with them. Now, when they get to the little foyer, the dogs will stop there, and the people will go in the sanctuary and say, nope. The dogs, and you know, dogs, they love their routine, and the dogs went out, and thankfully, all they did was sniff around the sanctuary and check it out, find their master's pew and sat down there, and they kind of like telling the family, come sit here. And I had dogs in church with me, and these are big shepherd dogs, and these are old wooden pews, so they were Wyoming people. They don't say much, the ranch people of Wyoming. They just kind of sat and stonily looked at you, wearing their brand new going to church Wranglers, and they're going to church cowboy boots, and they're going to church button-down Western shirt, took their Stetson off. The dogs' tails were wagging against the pews, thump, thump, thump. I'm convinced 2 dogs came to Christ that morning. Now, I noticed here, and Eric, if you're watching, no one brought a dog today to church. So I don't know how I'm going to get response from this crowd, but, you know, I appreciate you people. Thank you, Eric, and you all for allowing me to come and share the Word of God with you this morning. I'm, like I said, Habakkuk chapter 2, starting at verse 2, because that's the part where Habakkuk the prophet has raised some questions to God in chapter 1, and God's had a response, but Habakkuk's raised some more delicate questions near the end of chapter 1. And verse 2 is God responding to Habakkuk's question. Habakkuk's essentially asking, things are so bad in our time. We are living in a time where Judah is just a crumbling kingdom. The enemies around us are eroding away at our edges of our kingdom. Jerusalem's at risk. The priesthood seems to be failing in its essential job. There's corruption in our community. One of the questions he asked at the beginning of the chapter, if one is, God, why do you make us look at injustice? Why do we even have to view it? And he lived in a time before CNN. Could you imagine if he lived today, if he had to watch the Como News about what happens across the water over there, how he would respond? He's asking those questions. I live in this tumultuous, confusing time. Why do I have to view that? Chapter 2, verse 2. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision. Make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a time for the appointed time. It speaks the end and it does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right by them, but the righteous live by their faith. Key phrase. Keep that in your mind. The righteous live by their faith. Habakkuk 2:4. Moreover, wealth is treacherous. The arrogant do not endure. They open their throats wide as Sheol. Like death, they never have enough. They gather all nations to themselves and collect all peoples as their own. He's referencing Babylon, which is the growing power, which has conquered these evil Assyrians and other peoples, and they're gobbling up nations all around. They just conquered Lebanon to the north. They're coming. Shall not everyone taunt such people, and with mocking riddles say to them, alas, for you who heap up what is not your own, how long will you load yourselves with goods taken in pledge? Will not your own creditors suddenly rise, and those who make you tremble wake up? Then you will be booty for them. Because you have plundered many nations, all that survived of the people shall plunder you, because of the human bloodshed and violence on earth, through cities and all who live in them. Alas, for you who get evil gain for your house, setting your nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You devise shame for your house by cutting off your peoples. You forfeited your life. The very stones will cry out from the wall, and the plaster will respond from the woodwork. Alas, for you who build a town by bloodshed and found a city on iniquity. Is it not found that not from the Lord of hosts that people labor only to feed in the flames, and nations weary themselves for nothing? But the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. He keeps just waving in promise after promise in this passage here. Alas, for you who make your neighbors drink, pouring out your wrath until they are drunk, in order to gaze on their nakedness. You'll be sated with contempt instead of glory. Drink yourself and stagger. The cup of the Lord's right hand will come around you, and shame will come upon you in your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you. What a word right now. When my Bible study group hit that phrase this week, and we realized that this was not predicting what happened in Beirut last week, but a country right now, Lebanon, just staggered by one simple explosion because someone did not even pay attention to what they should be doing for their job. And hundreds of thousands without homes, thousands injured, and hundreds dead because someone didn't check a warehouse full of ammonium nitrate. He's not predicting that, but it just made us, we stopped right there in our Bible study this week and we focused and just prayed for Lebanon because it is a heartbeat of Christianity. Some of our oldest ancient churches, you talked about the early church, were right there. The home of those early churches. Because of human bloodshed and violence to the earth, the cities and all who live in them, he goes on to say, what use is an idol? Once its maker has shaped it, a cast image, a teacher of lies, for its maker trusts in what has been made, though the product is only an idol that cannot speak. Alas for you who say to the wood, wake up! To the silent stone, rouse yourself. Can it teach? See, it is gold, and it's silver-plated, and there is no breath in it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let the earth keep silence before him. We ask this question based on verse 4, the righteous will live by faith. How then shall I live? In the midst of tumultuous times, how then do I respond? How then do I live this life out as a follower, as a believer? It's easy to maybe just go through the motions, to fake it, to claim and make an intellectual assent to an idea, to say, okay, I'll just hopefully no one will catch on. Nathaniel Hawthorne, a great American author, for those of you probably in high school, junior high, grade school age, you probably at some point, and any of the rest of us, maybe at some point in English literature, you had to read like The Last of the Mohicans, The Leather Stocking Tales, those great cliffhangers. You know, I mean, literally this guy, Nathaniel Hawthorne, he loved the cliffhanger. I remember the first time I read The Last of the Mohicans, you'd finish a chapter like, I gotta get to the next page because Uncas is literally hanging from a ledge. She's gonna die. What's gonna happen next? You know, he's that great a writer. Well, he wrote this amazing little short story talking about how people can fake their life and be caught out. It's called Feathertop. It's a simple story. I'll just recite it for you as briefly as I can. Old Mother Rigby was the most cunning woman in New England. And one May, she saw her corn beginning to grow, and she thought, I'm going to make me a scarecrow to scare those crows away. So she took her old broom and fashioned it into a backbone and put a mealy bag on it and stuffed it with straw, placed a pumpkin on top of it, an old yellow pumpkin, and cut eyes and a little mouth. She took an old hoe for the right leg and a stick from her wood pile for the left leg and an old whisk broom for the left hand and a bent old stick for the right hand, and she put an old waistcoat over it and some breeches, and she found an old frayed, tattered coat and put it on there and found her dead husband's old feather-top wig, set it on the pumpkin. And she found his old hat and got the rooster's longest tail and stuck it in there, and she put it on there. And she was so amazed at the beauty of her scarecrow. Cunning Mother Rigby thought, I'm going to breathe life into this scarecrow and send him into town to get the magistrate that has vexed me for years. And she enchanted this scarecrow. And he became enamored, and he sucked in the breath of a magical pipe she put in his mouth. And he took on form, and he went into the city, and he found this magistrate, and he whispered his secret word in his ear, and he captured him, enamored him. People saw this scarecrow coming, and they just saw the glory that he had. He had to be some great French knight come to our village. Maybe he's the ambassador from Spain. Or maybe he's someone the king back in England sent to the former colonies to try and win his... Who knows why this glorious man is here? And young Polly, the magistrate's daughter, was wooed by him, and she saw the glory. And she fell in love with the scarecrow, Feathertop. But her daddy had bought her a beautiful little mirror and set it in the parlor for Polly to check herself each day. She's a lovely young woman, and she was checking her shawl to make sure she's appropriate for this esteemed visitor. And she looked in the mirror, and she saw his reflection, and she saw the scarecrow. She gasped, and the scarecrow, Feathertop, looked to see, and he saw himself for the first time as just a collection of sticks and straw. And went racing back to Mother Rigby and just collapsed on the floor, a pile of sticks and straw. Hawthorne is telling us so often we are the sticks and the straw And we go through life convinced who we think we truly are, and then one day someone shines a mirror on us and it shatters us. Judah, in the time of Habakkuk, was that straw man. We are the city on the hill. We have the temple of Jerusalem. We are the promised children of Abraham. And then one day, God showed a mirror using the Babylonian kingdom coming their way to see who they truly are. They had to realize that every king they've had since David and Solomon's time has just one way or another failed the nation. If you read the book of 1st and 2nd Kings or 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it's like every generation of kings is like, you think he was bad, watch and see what we do. I'm going to top that. The history of the Judean kings is just one tragedy after another, but they refuse to see. And then one day God comes along and says, I want you to look at yourself. Think of life and who we are. How then shall I live my life as in 4 realms? Just think of like a line going straight down, a line going straight across, and each one of the 4 corners you could put self, family, community, and I'm going to use the word kingdom, but I mean the kingdom of God. Those are your 4 essential, distinctive identities of who you are: self, family, community, and kingdom. How then do I live within those 4 realms, those 4 quadrants, those 4 areas of my life? We can search through scriptures, and there's plenty to be taught us, and we'll dig through Habakkuk here a little bit. We'll end up in Hebrews chapter 10 at some point, and we'll look at John, the Gospel of John, as we ask these questions. But I find it interesting that Habakkuk, in responding to the people of his time, gives what's called the oracle of the woes. That's the portion I read to you. If you caught it, every time the word, in my translation, says alas. In other translations, it's woe. It's the Hebrew word ayeh. Just so it's like an expression, like the old German, ach. It's just, that's what he starts each one of those sections with. Woes. Amazing how we pay attention to negative lessons more than positive lessons. And he does an examination of people in his time and the 10 Commandments. It took me a while to catch on to this. One of my fellow Bible study participants said on Friday, well, look, it's coveting. He started breaking it down, the 10 Commandments. Where are the 10 Commandments? Can anybody tell me where I find those in the Bible? Pardon? Exodus, good. Can anybody tell me where in Exodus? 20, boom. More and more people should probably mark that out and just have it in their Bible and refer back to it. I just want to read it real briefly. I got my little brass tag here. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents, the 3rd and 4th generation to those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. What a gracious God. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. On the 7th is the Sabbath to the Lord. Eric, enjoy your Sabbath rest today. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave, your livestock, your alien resident in your town, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land the Lord is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Short, sweet, to the point. Or your motorcycle. Short and sweet and to the point. And Habakkuk here goes through those commandments. Not all of them, all 10. But just pay attention as he works through it. Verse 6, the first one. Woe to you, to the people who break the 6th commandment. Theft. That's essentially what he's saying to these folks here is you've been out thieving. You've been building up what you have through taking what is not yours. And then he turns it around and he says, will not your own creditors suddenly rise up, and those who make you tremble wake up, and then you will be booty for them? What goes around comes around. If you're going to spend your life trying to get ahead and you're going to find ways to cut corners and cheat and steal and lie, and now here I am moralizing, it's going to come around and get you. That's the first commandment he takes a look at. Then in verse 9, the next woe, those who break the 10th commandment. Coveting. Because that's essentially what he's describing in verse 9. Who get evil gain for your house, setting your nest on high in order to be safe. By cutting off many peoples, you forfeit. Like the very stones will cry out from the wall. How many times in the scripture have we seen something that can't cry out, cry out? Think with me for a minute. The story of the first murder, Abel and Cain. When Cain killed his little brother Abel, what did God say when he came in the garden? I hear his blood crying out for you and for justice. And then on a more positive side, when Jesus on that first Palm Sunday rode into Jerusalem on a colt, and people are waving branches and they're proclaiming him the Messiah, and Hosanna, Hosanna, and the priests and the Pharisees walk up and say, can you quiet them down? This is getting embarrassing. And Jesus said, if I told them to be quiet, the very stones of this city will cry out. And here we have Habakkuk saying, these inanimate objects you have that you've been gathering and coveting from everybody else, they're going to cry out against you. Now, I've never heard an object cry out against me or cry out for any reason, but it's funny how us people and how things work. I can remember I grew up in Williston, North Dakota. It's a little sleepy town, truly sleepy town. It's not a comatose village like Arvada, but it's still a quiet town, or was back when I was there. It's now become a boom town for the oil patch. But when I lived there, the cops basically had one job, keep us teenagers in line, during the weekend so we didn't party too crazy, and then hand out traffic tickets. That's what our cops essentially did in my hometown. Until one day we actually had a bona fide real murder, and for the first time in life they could get their chalk out and draw the outline. She was shot down in front of her house, and they went out and they drew the outline of the victim on the sidewalk. The whole town had to drive by to see a chalk outline. We just only saw those in movies, on TV during, those TV cop shows. We had one now on our sidewalk. But that house, it became that house. It was the house of murder. It was the house where something that doesn't happen in our community took place. And that house, to this day, is still there, but it's the whole neighborhood's becoming commercial around it. No one wants to live there, and it's just because someone was murdered there. In a sense, the very sidewalk and the walls and the fence of that, it was a beautiful little garden place, nice lawn, little picket fence. That's the way I always saw it for a long time. The very walls will cry out against you. It may not be that audible voice, but it will happen. And then in verse 12, he gets the next woe, and it's the 6th commandment, murder. Alas for you verse 12. Alas for you who build a town by bloodshed, seeking power through murder and other ways of doing that. Alas for you who do this. Will not the Lord of hosts, is it not from the Lord of hosts that the people labor only to feed the flames? The nations weary themselves for nothing, but the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. If you want to gain power and glory, realize this, that only God has the glory. Only God truly has the glory. So he's working his way through these 4 quadrants I talked about. He's talked about the self. He's talking about family. He's talking about community now as he gets into this area in verse 12. Verse 15, he brings out another woe. And I had to struggle with this at first. It had to do more with sloth. There's no commandment against sloth. Because, this is a person using alcohol and other means. He's saying to bring woe to his community. There's no commandment against there's a sin that's called sloth, but in the 10 Commandments it doesn't address alcohol directly. It doesn't address this thing. But I realize that this is a form of adultery. When you allow a substance to come into your life, your bottom line, it's controlling you, and you're hungering after what should not be hungered after. You're crossing a line that God said, there's a safe line I put around you and your society and your family and your culture. And if you're going to use it responsibly, but do it right. Just like we get married and we got our partner and we stay with our partner, that's all healthy and beautiful and good, but there are times people just want to go marching right over that line. As a chaplain in the military, I counsel constantly. And they were interesting. I love military people, Marines and sailors, because they don't beat around the bush. if they got an issue, they just come right out. When I was in the civilian pastorate, people would take a while to get to know your pastor and find out what he can handle, what he can't handle. And it might take a couple years before they can finally sit down with you and say, here's my besetting sin. But in the military, it's just like, chaplain, I'm going to be transferred in a few months. I don't have time. This is it. I got to deal with this. And it became obvious for me that about 15 years ago, our culture had made a shift when it comes to these guidelines, these barriers in our society that have been placed there for a long time for reasons that are good and healthy. People said, I still know they're there. Just like I was told this morning, there's a dot here and there's a dot here. I can't go past those or the camera loses me. People know that there are lines, but it's almost as if they're saying, and chaplain, I'm walking up to the line and I see that line coming, and I know I shouldn't go past it, and I'm at the line, and now I know I shouldn't be crossing it, and I gone past the line, and now but I'm just an animal. I'm going to go anyway, because I'm just an animal. I got needs and drives. They forget that they're image bearers. We are all image bearers of God. That's why when I read the Ten Commandments, the third one, there's an interesting discussion going on in our Bible study world today of saying when it says, do not take the Lord's name in vain, we often see that as cursing. Don't curse and don't make oaths with the Lord, but the more correct Hebrew translation is don't bear the Lord's name in vain. Since we are the kingdom of God visible on earth, we are the church visible in this community here. We are the ambassadors that have been sent with the message of reconciliation. We bear that carefully. And you've seen it in your own life when you've screwed up. And people are like, well, I thought you were a Christian. Or, pastor, how dare you do that? And they're right, calling me on something because I was an idiot. I did something wrong. As my best friend in life always told me, I don't just simply have a big mouth. I have a size 12 mouth, and I stick my size 12 foot in it regularly. It's as if people forget we're image bearers, or they regret that they're image bearers, and they just feel like there's no stopping. The line's coming. Oh, here it comes. Oh, I'm over it. Ouch. Goes with anything we have, whether it's substance abuse or relationships, anything like that. And here's Habakkuk just talking about the woe. This cup will eventually turn on you. Time and time again, we've seen when someone has violated that line and gone into a relationship they wouldn't or shouldn't have, eventually it came around. Just this week alone, a prominent evangelical leader has had to resign his position at a large, prominent private Christian college because he posted on his own a photograph on his own Instagram site of him standing next to a young woman, not his wife, they were out vacationing as a group, and she's wearing a high-cut t-shirt, bare midriff showing, and her, I think she had a bathing suit on, so she just got her shorts on, but they're unzipped. And he's next to her, holding her around the waist, and he's got a drink in his hand, and he's goofing off, rolled his shirt up, and got his pants unzipped. Ha-ha, being silly, and the board made him step down. He crossed the line. Yeah, he crossed the line. And he needs to step down from leadership because his school has strict rules on how you're supposed to comport yourself. If you're a student at this school, you don't date this way, there's very strong guidelines on social behavior, that he violated. And he's the president of the school. So, pardon? That's where it was. Just this week. And society's right to say, that was wrong. Now, hopefully there's a restitution process, and hopefully he's going to come forward and say, I was wrong, and what do I have to do to go into restoration? I hope those things take place. And we have seen glorious times where that has, where men and women have fallen and restored. I wouldn't be surprised I'm in a room with fallen men and women who've been restored, standing right here in my midst. We've all done that. There, but for the grace of God, go I. And here's Habakkuk talking to these people of Judea and saying, finally he goes to verse 19 and breaks the last woe, which is the violation of the second commandment, make no idols. Isn't it ironic throughout history, mankind has found ways to create idols from the earliest temple found in Turkey, dating 3,000 years before Stonehenge, 5,000 years before the pyramids. They built a temple with jaguar gods and pig gods and faceless beings standing a guard over this. Thousands and thousands of years before people supposedly knew how to make this stuff, they made this temple in the middle of Turkey. We have built idols from day one. And the irony that he points out is the idols are silent. The idols can't talk, they can't breathe, they can't move. It's ironic that idol worshipers make all the noise. We go before these things we've created and we beseech them and we throw offerings at them and we make all the noise constantly. And they're silent. That's why he's able to say in the next verse, after he talks about idols, but the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silent before him. A true God who speaks oftentimes brings us to silence. In the seminary I went to in Portland, Oregon, we'd walk in the back to enter this chapel. And, as a seminarian, we were required to be at chapel 3 times a week. And that's good. It was awesome worship. Worship just like this, many of the same ways, same kind of music, same kind of flow of service. It was not much different from what you're experiencing right here. But there was a simple old wooden sign at the very back as you walked in the door. And all it said was, silence is the best preparation for worship. They were just inviting us to come in, settle for a few minutes, take a deep breath, put the world behind us, leave it like Corky was saying, leave that world behind for a while, come in here in the presence of God, enjoy this presence. We may get loud and boisterous in our songs and the prayers and the testimonies will probably raise hallelujahs and we will celebrate the presence of God, but for a few moments, let's be silent in preparation. Habakkuk is telling his people, God is in his temple. Keep silence before him. How often we've seen that when Isaiah finally realized he's in the presence of holy God in Isaiah chapter 6, I am a man of unclean lips. That's the first thing he says. When Moses realizes he's at the burning bush and he's removed his sandals and stood bare feet, and he realizes in the presence, and God says, I got a mission for you. I can barely talk. I stutter. We are in the presence of a holy God, and we are called to that silence. Now, I said this is a little book and it's got a huge impact. How big an impact? Do you realize that verse 4 of this chapter was quoted 3 times in the New Testament? The righteous will live by faith. Twice Paul quoted it. First time in Romans chapter 1 at verse 17. The second time in Galatians chapter 3 verse 11. And then the writer of the book of Hebrews, may have been Paul, may have been somebody else, never put their name on it so we don't know for certain, chapter 10 verse 38. That powerful a statement 500 years before the time of Christ was quoted 3 times clearly in the New Testament. The righteous will live by faith. In Hebrew, it's 3 short words. It's 6 in English, but in Hebrew, it's just simply vasadik be'motnoti ha. That's all it is. It's just boom, it's short. But we have to add words to it to make sense in English. The righteous will live by faith. 3 times, twice Paul in his most doctrinal passage letters he wrote, the book of Romans and the book of Galatians, where he deals with the core of Christianity, he quotes it at key points. And then Hebrews. Let me just read the Hebrews section to you. Let's start back at verse 32. But recall those earlier days when after you've been enlightened, you endured hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to abuse and persecution, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion for those who were in prison. You cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. Do not therefore abandon the confidence of yours. It brings a great reward. For you need endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, the one who's coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. My soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back. But we are not among those who shrink back, but among those who have faith and so are saved. What a powerful word for us. What a powerful word for us. Hebrews chapter 10. It reminds me, he's talking about how as an early Christian, you struggled. People didn't like it. you were persecuted. He also brings out how we persevere and stay with it. And we're reminded in John chapter 1 when it says that the Word came among us and lived amongst us. Think about this for a minute. How then shall we live? God came among us as Christ, not to reveal simply God to us, but Jesus came in the form of a man to show us how we should live, how we can be. As Paul would later write elsewhere in his letters, imitate me as I imitate Jesus. Just a quick thing before I turn it back over to Corky. I brought these with. It's a little wall. It's electric. You can put on a fridge. Talking about how then should we live. This is Dr. Matthew Sleeth, a guy I highly respect. He's a church leader out in the East. He's an MD. This is prescription for each one of you to take a Sabbath rest. Simply says, rest for 24 hours, dispense one time a week, do not mix with work. I'm just leaving these. I'm giving each one of you a prescription to take a rest. These are free. I'll probably just leave them right up here. Come and help yourself. Stick them on the fridge. Corky, back over to you.
Thanks, brother. All right, well, we're going to close out. Can we give him a hand offering this morning? Thank you for bringing the word, Pastor. Thank you. I got a lot of that. All right, well, we're going to close with worship. And I just hope your day is blessed. I call it blessed. May your day be healthy, restful, and I hope in some kind of way that you walk away with an experience. Because I truly believe that our worship should be an experience. Oh, I'm a traveler, far from home. I get lost, but I press on. 'Cause there's a mansion, the streets of gold, where I belong.